All right, welcome everyone. I'd like to call the Village of Cottage Grove Board special meeting for the Village of Cottage Grove Board of Trustees to order. We are holding this meeting as a Zoom due to the pandemic. So the link to the Zoom meeting is at the top of the agenda. And audio call-in number is also available at the top of the agenda with an ID number as well for those that choose to connect into the meeting in that fashion. So we'll start with a roll call to see if we have a quorum. Elisa?
Allen?
Present.
Lindbergh? Murphy?
Present.
Ratcliffe? Valencia?
Present.
Vandervelde? And Williams.
Present. Thanks, Lisa. We have a quorum. The agenda was properly posted. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. So please find a flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, with moving on then, the fourth item is public appearances, public's opportunity to speak. So at this moment, I will take a pause and allow anybody from the public to please state your name, your address, and hold your comments to no more than 3 minutes, just in case we have a number of individuals who would like to speak. So we'll start with that. So I will now pause and allow anybody to chime in.
My name's Dawn Douglas Mellum, and I'm here with my husband, Mike Mellum. We live at 504 East Dentaria Drive in the village. And we just wanted to sit in because we heard there was going to be kind of some talk about some hydrate the air issues and so forth. In our neighborhood, we live right behind Hydrate. We actually back up to Hydrate, the park behind it. But they talked about possible carcinogens, and I know of at least 6 people in my close proximity that have had cancer or tumors since living out here. So that's something that's concerning to me still. I was here when they had a fire and it blew up into a mushroom cloud back in the 90s. So I guess we're just here to kind of listen and hear what is being done about any of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. Any others? All right. Then we'll move on then to the topic of the special meeting. And that is item 5 is a public forum for information and discussion regarding the Hydrate Chemical Company and the environmental regulations related to the Hydrate's operations. This stemmed from an article late last year. I think it was in the State Journal, as well as some other local media outlets, just indicating that the that Hydride had paid a fine working with the EPA on some air pollutants and some items where they hadn't followed their procedures quite the way they were supposed to. So with that, we tried to manage and get all the parties together as best we could, and find a date, and lo and behold, we're finally here. This has been kind of led by Trustee Heidi Murphy. She is a chair of the Utility Commission as well as a trustee for the last couple of years. So she's been kind of moving this forward for the board up to this point. I would like to stop and allow representatives from the EPA, Hydrite, and the DNR to just acknowledge that they're with us in the meeting. So don't all speak at once.
Hi, this is Barb Pavlicek. I'm with the Air Management Program of the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. And I'll turn my video off while we're in the meeting just to conserve bandwidth and help make sure people can hear properly. But if anybody wants a video on, of course I can do that too. But I work out of normally the Fitchburg Service Center, and I've been supervisor there for about 3 years. And so I'm here to try and help get any answers that I can. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Barb.
This is Steve Martin with the Remediation and Redevelopment Program with the Department of Natural Resources. As the case with Barb, I'm also typically out of the Fitchburg office, but with COVID, working virtually like everybody else. I'm kind of standing in for our former project manager. A number of you may have known that Mike Schmoller with the department had managed this project for many years. Mike passed away suddenly last summer. So we're still mourning his loss, and especially trying to move ahead in light of all the information that he was able to absorb and deal with over the number of years with Hydrite. So in the interim, I'm standing in as supervisor for the region. We also have online today a young hydrogeologist project manager who joined us about a year ago, Luke Lampo, who I've assigned the site to, and will be picking up the mantle from Mike and myself here in the near future, but he's just coming up to speed, and in the interim, I'll be tag teaming it with him until we get it figured out. So, and our program deals primarily with the soil and groundwater issues at the site.
All right, thanks, Steve. Anybody else from the DNR? All right, we'll move on then to the EPA. Representative Zare.
Hi, my name is Victoria Nelson. I am with US EPA Region 5 based in Chicago. I work in Clean Air Act enforcement as an environmental engineer, and I was on the Hydrite matter from the initial inspection. So, I'm here today, and I'm happy to answer any questions about the Clean Air Act violations that we resolved with Hydrite.
Thank you, Victoria. And then Hydrite, Representative Zare.
I'm sorry, I just was going to introduce myself. I'm sorry, Jen. I'm Mary McAuliffe. I'm an attorney with EPA who worked with Victoria on the Clean Air Act settlement. Sorry to interrupt.
All right, thanks, Mary. Sorry, I missed you. Anybody
Josh Singer with EPA also here.
This is what I was going to ask. Thank you. All right, anybody else from the EPA? All right, well, then we'll move on to representatives from the Hydrite.
Hi, I'm Tom Miazga with Hydrite. Been with Hydrite for 30 years and came to Hydrite from the DNR. And I can certainly address the air and groundwater issues that we're here to talk about. Appreciate the opportunity. And with me is Dan.
Good evening, I'm Dan Wojciechowicz. I'm the general manager for the process business, so I'm based there in Cottage Grove. I've been with Hydrate for about 5 years, and my overall responsibilities are both the operations and commercial management of the business.
All right, thanks, Tom, and thanks, Dan. Then with also here is a number of members of the village board, which I think everybody saw earlier when we all did a roll call as typical. We'll move right then to Heidi put together a list of questions, I think based on feedback we heard from residents, as well as and provided those ahead of time to all the parties. And we want to get started at least with those and then continue on from there. So Heidi, you want to kind of move forward with the list of questions that you had?
Sure, thanks, John. I thought it might be helpful to start out with some general information. I wanted to thank all of our parties for getting together today so we can get information to our residents so they can understand what happened and what Hydrate does and what they're doing to make sure our water and air is clean and safe. So it might be helpful to do a little bit of background on kind of a high-level summary of the operations that you do in Cottage Grove. You don't have to get too deep, but a quick overview of what Hydrate does in Cottage Grove.
Good. Earlier in the week, I forwarded a link to Hydrate's webpage, and I hope you all had a chance to look at that because, as you can see, it's a very diverse company. We're nationwide now. And it does have, a site there for the process business, which is Cottage Grove. So that hopefully you took a look at that and understand a little bit more about Hydrate. The family owned, been here for 90 years, based in Wisconsin. And it would be, I would do it injustice to try to explain everything about Hydrate. So hopefully you had a little bit of time to learn a little bit about the kind of the company Hydrate is. And Dan, I think, can explain, the basic business, what we do at Cottage Grove. And
Yep.
Go ahead.
I'll be glad to. Thanks again for having us today. I'm going to talk a little bit about Hydrate overall and then get into specifics in Cottage Grove. So as Tom mentioned, we started back about 90 years ago in 1929 here in Wisconsin. We currently have about a dozen locations throughout the U.S. and about 1,000 employees. There's multiple different business units within Hydrate that sell multiple different products into the various different chemical industries. We have a food group, an ag group, industrial, sulfur, energy, foam, and then ultimately the process business, which is the one we'll specifically talk about today. In Cottage Grove, we do have about 150 employees in total between the two sides of the street, the east side and the west side of the street. And that site started in the 1970s in solvent recycling and has grown since then. In the early 1990s, the Cottage Grove manufacturing facility started more toll manufacturing. And what that is making other companies products for them, utilizing their processes, their technology, because either they don't have the capacity, they don't have the technical capability, or maybe just the geographic location. They need to have it here made in the Midwest instead of elsewhere. If you were to ever look into our facility, you'll see it's a world-class modern manufacturing facility. It looks much like some of the big chemical facilities throughout the world. And over the past 15 years, as well before that, we've invested significant capital to continue to improve upon safety and also have the infrastructure in place for growth. A little bit about the customers and the products. The customers, if I were to be able to give names, you'd see that they represent a lot of the blue chip chemical companies in the chemical industry that people would recognize. And I think that's important to point out because those folks would not put things in somebody else's facility if they didn't trust them from a safety and environmental and a compliance record. These companies choose us not only for our capabilities, but also for our safety record, and they take safety very seriously and ultimately trust us to operate as an extension of them. In Cottage Grove, we produce a lot of different product types, anywhere from very basic blending of a few raw materials and packaging it out to more sophisticated processes of making some complex molecules and everything in between. The products are shipped out in anything from drums to totes, tankers, and rail cars. And as far as the industries they go into, they go into various different industries, such as electronics, the case industry, which is coatings, adhesives, sealants, and elastomers, the ag industry, automotive, preservatives, and any more. Whoever screens up on the wall now, you have a real nice blue wall behind you. If you've bought a gallon of architectural paint for your home, there's a really good chance that has a raw material in it that we made in Cottage Grove. Especially if it's from a few brands. Also, if you're wearing a t-shirt that has antimicrobial properties to it, so if you went to the store and bought it and it says guaranteed fresh or something like that, there's a chance that it contains materials that we made at our facility. From an operating perspective, there was a question that was sent to us that you wanted to know more about our procedures that are required in the manufacturing and blending processes. We can talk about those. And just generally speaking, our operations, we utilize very detailed SOPs during the manufacturing of our products. There's protocols in place, such as daily, weekly, monthly, and quarterly checks to ensure safety and ultimately also environmental compliance. Within that question, there was a part of it talked about a controlled release. What I wanted to share is all of our emissions from the manufacturing vessels, they go through something called a thermal oxidizer. So they don't get emitted to the atmosphere. This piece of equipment is a control device that has extremely high, almost close to 100% destruction of any emissions, so it doesn't get emitted into the environment. Any questions about any of those items?
Dan, just real quick, for those that don't know what SOP is, it is a standard operating procedure. It's lingo used in a lot of different industries. I heard you say it, I saw a puzzled look, and I wanted to make sure that the folks on the phone knew that. It's just a set of instructions that a lot of different businesses would use in their approach to a process or a thing that they do on, repetitively, generally.
Thank you.
And the standard operating procedures we use to manufacture each product is actually a technical transfer from our customers that we work with them to make sure we get every step, absolutely correct, but then tailor it to our own equipment and operation. So they have, like Dan mentioned, safety built right into them and step-by-step instruction. They have deviation identification in them that if, a temperature goes over this particular point, there's actions to be taken, et cetera. So they can be up to, 40 pages long. But that's the detail that, obviously you have to have when you're in the chemical industry.
I'm sorry I was late to the meeting tonight due to some unforeseen circumstances, but I just noted when you used the phrase controlled release, in the past, that was also used to describe explosions that happened when there was a plume that rose above from into the neighborhood adjacent. So are you still referring to unplanned explosions as controlled releases?
No, not at all. I don't know where that term came from.
It came from the question that was...
No, I see the question, but we don't have any controlled releases, if you will. What happened back in the early 90s was contractors were in and didn't follow our instructions, and they were welding on a tank that formerly held flammable liquids. And that tank, basically blew its top off. Luckily, nobody was seriously injured, but OSHA came in, did full investigation, found the contractors basically liable, for what happened because they didn't follow proper protocol when doing hot work on an quote empty tank. So that was nothing that was planned, and certainly we have safeguards in place to prevent overpressurization, very stringent hot work permit programs, and lockout tagout programs where you make sure everything's safe before you start working on it. So yeah, that in the 90s, it was 25, 30 years ago.
I would say that there's a newsreel from probably 2009 where there was a plume that happened, and the spokesperson in front of Hydrate at that time used controlled release, even though it was not planned. And Jan Housley, when she was doing DNR permit open meetings in front of some of us who were asking questions, also used that. And it was sort of designed as a PR spin to make it sound like that was meant to happen, when in fact those particulates were possibly being, spread in air, in rain onto our homes, our kids, our soil. So it's been more recent for sure that controlled release has been part of the dialogue between the residents and Hydrate.
Okay, again, I'm not familiar with that exact incident. I'll have to go back and look and find out, okay, what was that? And, Jana is no longer with us, so I don't know the context in which he was referring.
Dan, did you have more intro items that you wanted to cover, or should we move into kind of the next, some of the questions that were shared?
No, thank you. That was the intro that I wanted to give.
Okay. Heidi, can you continue then, please?
Sure, thanks, John. So the next section I would like to cover is moving into the EPA Clean Air Act violations and hazardous air pollutant information. So I'd like to get, there was a very detailed summary that I also read, but just talk in general about what the EPA found. Was it in the course of regular monitoring, or was it due to a specific situation? So I'm not sure which, if the EPA would perhaps start out what their findings were.
Hi, yeah, I'm happy to get into that. So, you asked if this was part of normal monitoring. At the federal level, we don't really go to all facilities in our region on a certain basis because that's a lot of facilities and we don't have enough people to do that. So, we kind of go to facilities throughout the region, kind of not on a totally random basis, but as far as I know, there wasn't anything that triggered our inspection. I don't recall if there was a complaint at the time, but, we went on the inspection in, I think, early 2017. That was our first inspection of the facility, and we found a number of issues that we ended up resolving with the company this past year. Some of those issues involved the facility has a number of storage tanks on site. We went out with equipment that's capable of monitoring for some of these hazardous air pollutants, and we found that some of the equipment on top of these tanks were not being maintained properly. We're leaking some emissions to the air. And I don't want to raise it. This was an issue that we resolved with the company. It's not so uncommon for this to happen at facilities of this nature. So, we commonly refer to these as fugitive emissions, so I'm trying to think how I can explain it so it's understandable to people who aren't familiar with this, but it's like you think about your pipes at home that might leak, gaskets break down, valves break down. That's kind of what we noticed at this facility is some of the hatches on top of these tanks and the other equipment didn't have gaskets that were keeping those emissions in. And so we identified a number of those in our inspection report. these kinds of leaks, valves, and different types of equipment can happen throughout a facility of this kind. And companies like this will have a specific type of program for controlling these emissions, and we refer to those as leak detection and repair programs. So what they'll do is they'll go out with similar equipment to what we went out with and monitor equipment throughout the facility for these leaks. And during our inspection, we observed some issues with this company's LDAR program. So one example is they were using a certain type of equipment that can't see all types of chemicals. So they, at one area of their facility, they weren't able to see a certain type of emission. So we, alerted them that they needed to use a certain type of monitoring equipment so that they were able to see all of these emissions. And so that was something we identified in the inspection. Another thing we found was that the facility wasn't, they were potentially underestimating this source of emissions, these fugitive emissions. And so, that was part of our concern, is that, if they're emitting more than they might think they are, they could potentially be subject to other rules under the Clean Air Act. So that was a lot of what went into our consent decree that we filed, I think earlier this year with the court. And that was one of the bulk of what was in our resolution with the company. I will say, soon after that inspection, we sent a letter to the company alerting them to these issues. They came in and talked to us, and they did take efforts to repair some of these issues, like the leaks on top of these tanks, and they took steps to monitor their equipment with the right monitoring equipment so they could ensure that they're capturing these leaks better as they're doing their program throughout the facility. And then I think from there, I'll go ahead and get into the next question, unless anyone has follow-up questions on the inspection, what was found in those.
Well, Victoria, this is Tom from Hydrate. Nice to see you.
Me too. Yeah.
And so we spent 3 years talking about this subject, and I guess at the end of the day, agreed to disagree. So we now are into the performance monitoring plan. But
right.
For people's information, Hydrate believes we are in substantial compliance with our permit and with the air rules. We were doing the monitoring, and when I say we actually hire a third-party consultant that specializes in this type of monitoring to do the monitoring for us. And as Victoria said, EPA would prefer us to use one type of monitor. Our permit actually allowed us to use the kind of monitor we were using. But we understood the difference between the readings, and we switched over to the more sensitive monitor, if you will. The data that was questioned, we thought we could prove that we were what we call a minor source, not a major source for these emissions. But there was too much discrepancy in EPA's eyes for us to use our data to prove our case. So and correct me if I'm stepping out of bounds here, Mary and Victoria, but when EPA calculated these potential fugitive emissions, they used very conservative emission factors. With the real data, there would be a difference. So I think that's kind of the crux of where we're at with working through this with the EPA. We're on basically a 2-year program to monitor everything on a regular frequency and have third-party consultants oversee our consultants to make sure that all the data that we collect over the course of the next 2 years, if you will, is valid and acceptable to EPA, to Hydrate, to basically the science of the rule, to more conclusively calculate our actual fugitive emissions. Is that fair?
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
I'm not sure if I'm able to or not, but will there ever be a time that we won't smell the chemicals in the air?
Well, we certainly are taking every step where, you shouldn't, but...
We do. I mean, we live right behind there, and you do smell them all the time.
Well, and that's kind of the nature of the business.
I know, but we're talking about emissions, so that's the only reason I'm asking.
No, I understand that. And there are, fugitive emission limits that are allowed by rule. And I know at times that, you may smell something, but there should not be at, concentrations that are, detrimental to human health or the environment. They are basically allowed, if you will. If we were a chocolate factory, you'd be smelling chocolate. But the nature of the business is that we're not. So there will be fugitive emissions from time to time.
But clearly the emissions that the EPA had in their report were dangerous to humans. And how long did that go on? When was the last EPA inspection?
Let's be clear here. There are emissions. They are within the rules. The amount of emissions is what's at question here. But regardless of whether we're a minor source or a major source for these emissions, they're still allowable. So no emissions is not practical. EPA can't regulate to zero. And chemical facilities can't operate to zero.
I don't think anybody's talking about zero. We're talking about how many years they went on above the cap that is allowed.
Again, we've been doing this monitoring for years and doing our emission estimates, and the EPA found some fault with the way our data was being collected and the frequency of the monitoring, and the performance of our third-party consultant. So again, we've talked to EPA for 3 years about what the difference is here, and I guess, like I say, at the end of the day, we agreed to disagree and just get it right. What are our actual emissions?
Tom, I would like to say that I lived near the Hydrite plant for a decade, and I have degrees in theology and political science. I stayed away from chemicals and biology as far as I could. But even as a resident, I knew that there was something going on. I had Dave, the safety manager, on speed dial. It was me and my kids playing outside several times where I called the Hydrite, I called Dave, sometimes on the weekends, and I said, our eyes are watering, our throats are burning, something's going on. And one time it was one of the solvents that you all were using, and it was dripping on that back lot next to the park where the kids were playing. And that's the time they ended up digging out, half an acre from just a drip from a tank. So if it takes a resident living half a mile away to detect a spill, I'm saying that for too many years, whatever you're using for your emissions regulations to make sure that they are within limits is not good enough.
Okay, and I know that every time we get a complaint for odor or whatever, we report it to the DNR, and then we, obviously look into what happened. There can be accidental releases at times, which we address immediately. But
Tom, I called you at one point years ago, and I remember very specifically being belittled, saying that I was imagining things and that everything there was within the legal limits.
Well, it very well could be.
Well, it wasn't within the legal limits when tankers, which were on the back lot, which weren't even supposed to be as a storage, were being dripped. And then you sent somebody into the village board when I was a seat on the village board and said, well, we're going to put down cement pads to catch the leaks. You put down porous cement to catch leaks next to a park where kids are playing?
That is all been fully paid back there, secondary containment, stormwater control. There's not much more you can do. And again, if a tanker was leaking, that's an anomaly. That they don't typically leak. So again, it was an equipment malfunction of some kind, because we certainly don't intentionally release anything.
Could I ask about the monitoring systems and requirements as a result of the violation for a moment? I'd like to know what is being used now, and if that goes beyond the 2-year, it seems like kind of a probationary period or something, monitoring period after the violations. I mean, I'm trying to figure out what kind of, we're talking about, like, we'll just use a simple example. If you're trying to test someone for COVID with a pregnancy test, you're never going to get COVID positive. So is this the kind of discrepancy we have in testing for the hazardous air pollutants, or is it like a sensitivity, or where it was placed in wind direction, or so it was placed, down upwind, so it was never blowing on the monitor?
No, these are handheld instruments with a kind of little suction wand on the end, and we have in the neighborhood of 35,000 points that need to be monitored. It's every pipe connection, every valve, every pump, and there's a specific method by EPA to perform this monitoring. You have to be within so many centimeters of the connection, and the two different meters, as Victoria mentioned, one has a broader range of compounds that it will detect than the other. It's not hugely different, but there is a slight difference there. We've been, even after we switched to the other monitor, we did not see a significant increase in leaks, if you will. So again, we've got years of data that is very consistent, and even after our consultants improved their method and we used the different meter, we are not seeing any significant change in our fugitive emissions. But as Victoria, in fairness, yes, we did have some leaks around some tanks that didn't get, they had work orders and they just didn't get fixed in a timely manner. So yeah, there were some lapses in our process in terms of find a leak, fix a leak. But we got all that squared away now, and using the equipment prescribed by EPA, and our third-party consultants have been retrained and are now also being audited by a third party yet to satisfy that this is all being done properly. And it's not that it was being done that improperly before. Like I say, our data hasn't really changed a lot, but it is the agreement we have with EPA to basically resolve this issue once and for all.
Heidi, could I ask the DNR rep, please? When we were in conversation with Mike Ellenbecker, who was our contact person when we first started asking questions, he explained to us that the DNR's monitoring site was in the opposite direction of where the homes were in the neighborhood adjacent to Hydrate. Is that still the case? We happen to have a climatologist who lived in the neighborhood, and he was very clear that that was the opposite direction of the prevailing wind, so it was a worthless place. So I'm wondering, why didn't Wisconsin DNR find issues? Why did it take the EPA coming in 2017 to find these?
In this area, I think we have some crossover between the two programs. At the DNR for the air program, the monitors, something I'll clarify a little bit is there's different kinds of monitors. There's the monitoring equipment, the handheld devices, sampling devices that they use for the leak detection program. And then there's also monitors that are ambient air quality monitors, which are a different type of monitor, and our program locates those according to EPA appropriate designations, and we submit plans for where we're going to put these monitors around the state. And so with those kinds of monitors, they're located where they are for purposes not specific to any one facility, but specific to ambient air quality issues to register background concentrations across the state. So the location of that one is kind of not relative to it wasn't put there relative to hydrite, and we're not going to move it relative to hydrite. So we have that monitor going on. With regard to the improved handheld monitors that they're using for the leak detection system, we're watching very closely to see how the numbers play out as Hydrite continues to use this over the time frame of this 2-year project, and see how emissions change relative to the change in monitors. And as it turns out, those handheld monitors didn't exist for the air program to use prior to this year because we didn't own one. So we couldn't use that same technology to find the number of leaks that EPA ended up finding when they visited the plant. We've since acquired one of those. They're not cheap, and we intend to use it going forward. And we already have, based on some input from EPA and some improved training on how to detect leaks in these kinds of scenarios, we've already improved the number of violations that we've found at this and other facilities. So we're continuing to improve on these, and we essentially can only do as good as the equipment we have available to us and the training that we get provided. And we try to get updated on that as often as possible. And this process has led to some improved training for us, which is great. But we'll keep an eye on it, and we'll keep the facility on their 2-year inspection cycle and see how it goes. Did that get to your question?
Sort of. If you don't know, I just want it made clear for the record that there was a group of us working very hard to keep the land, the air, the people, the kids safe in that neighborhood. And we truly felt like we were working against the Wisconsin DNR. And that continues to be a frustration. I asked for a records request, and they said, sure, it'll be $400. The Wisconsin DNR did not do what it is charged to do, and it should not have taken residents to report leaks. And that wasn't just one time, that was several times. And so I hope going forward that the DNR does a better job protecting both the resources and the people.
Okay, just to keep us on task, the board will continue to ask questions through Heidi's list. If we have comments at the end, certainly we can have those from the public, but we need to keep this moving on that direction. Otherwise, we'll get into an open discussion, and that's not what this was posted as being as far as a meeting. So Heidi, continue. Very good input, but again, I want to be careful with how we do that because we don't want to get to an open discussion without being properly posted.
Thanks, John. So it sounds like we have a leak detection and repair system with increased technology for the next 2 years. But I'd like to know a little bit more about the other corrective actions and preventative measures that you're taking at Hydrite to monitor these fugitive emissions and keep them under permitted levels moving forward.
Well, what we did, as we were working with EPA over the last 3 years, we replaced pressure relief devices, manways on storage tanks, better technology. Wasn't required, but we, did that anyway. We improved our employee training and vessel inspections, so the employees know what to look for. We expanded the actual monitoring program beyond what's required. We now monitor non-waste and non-storage tank equipment, which allows us, better information to calculate our fugitive emissions. We're continuing to work on the emission calculations, the theoretical versus the actual, to make sure that we're producing real numbers and that are based on science, not on theoretical emission factors, if you will. So we continue to narrow it down. Obviously, like Dan said, our capital spend at that facility is very high, and it is all geared towards compliance and safety for the most part. When we add equipment, it's usually in a partnership with our customer who, basically pays for the equipment so we can make their products properly. So the facility's been there, quite a while. There's always things to be upgraded. And we're continually pouring money into it, and not only improving our equipment, but our controls, so that trying to make it, every year less manual and more automated. So.
Sure, I just have one follow-up on that. If in your monitoring procedures and if something is discovered, either, unplanned or accident, is there a system for notifying residents if they should stay inside or, 24/7 system to notify of any?
We work very closely with the LEPC and the local hazmat. And we've been members of the LEPC for years. We have an off-site plan, is what they call it, that basically identifies who does what between Hydrite and local emergency response in Dane County. So if there is a release to the environment of a certain chemical that's above a certain level, it's an automatic call to the National Response Center and to the DNR within 20 minutes so that appropriate action can be taken. To my knowledge, we haven't had one of those releases out there in long memory. But yeah, we have a very, very robust spill management plan and reporting plan. And any type of spill, air and or liquid on the ground, is calculated and determined immediately. Obviously, it's attended to immediately as well. Obviously, we're in the chemical business, and this is very important to us. It's nothing we take lightly. I guess that's what I can tell you.
Yeah, we might. Sure. If there's any other follow-ups on that, I guess we can address that at the end. But in the, we could move on to the migrating ground pollutants. I'm on the Utility Commission and also the Parks Committee, and presented to each of those committees about monitoring stations that have been placed at Houston Park for migrating ground pollutants. And I was wondering if you might cover what you're monitoring there, and the DNR, I think, has some part in that, and what we're monitoring, what is the future of that, and how we're gonna look at that moving forward.
Okay. Well, as I mentioned, I came to the DNR, from the DNR. I worked there as a regulator as well as a hydrogeologist. And I came to Hydrite 30 years ago, primarily because of the Cottage Grove site. It is a very contaminated site Hydrate unfortunately bought that site back in the early 70s, 1970, I believe, but that was before, people were doing environmental due diligence on property transactions, so they unknowingly bought into this contaminated site. It's primarily contaminated with solvents because the prior owner was accumulating solvents on site in hopes of getting a solvent recycling facility going. Because back in the early 70s, there was the oil embargo and all the oil shortages and the lines of cars going to gas stations and all. And it was a good idea because the cost of virgin solvents was very high. So, but unfortunately, the prior owner never got the business going, but yet kept accumulating solvent waste on site. And a lot of that waste was in drums that got released. We're not sure how as much solvent got in the ground as it did, but Hydrate comes along, and in the early 80s, they were going to expand the warehouse on the east side, and the solvent vapors basically drove the guys out of the ditch when they were digging the footings. So that's when early 80s is when DNR got involved, monitoring wells started going in, and they did attempt to try to pump and treat some of that contamination. But I came on to Hydrate in 1990, and the scope and magnitude of the problem was totally underestimated. So for the last 30 years, we've been working in cooperation with US EPA at first, and now the DNR, to continue to try to define the degree and extent of the contamination. Now we've come a very long way with that, and there was a contaminant plume that traveled quite a ways to the east, out into the town. And we put in what we call a hydraulic barrier system to cut off that plume. We also replaced, I think, over 30 private wells out in that neighborhood to provide safe drinking water from them for those residents. And I continue to do so today should a new home want to be built in a certain zone designated by DNR. So that I can tell you right now that the degree and extent of the contamination is primarily described. What is leaving the site is being controlled, and at this time, the groundwater contamination does not present a threat to human health or the environment, except the fact that the contamination is there. Recently, and I did send along, at least to the village board today, hopefully you received it, was a 2-page description of the people that we're working with to continue to study the site. It's that university consortium. And if you had a chance to look at that, you can see it's an international collection of scientists and researchers that all collaborate on the development and advancement of the science of groundwater contamination. Now, they've been with us since 2003, and we work in cooperation with DNR to plan out the work that's going to be done, year over year, as it's primarily led by the consortium. So we're getting our advice in terms of what we got and how to deal with it from the best minds in the world working on this site. It's quite unique. There's no other site in the state, and very few sites in North America that get this kind of attention. So I can tell you that this isn't me telling people what to do. This is experts in the world that are helping us, guide us, and manage this site appropriately for what we have. But when it comes to the contamination that's moved towards the park, we knew it had been there, but as we continue to do some research wells, we found low levels of volatile organics solvents that seemingly were moving kind of against what we had traditionally thought the groundwater flow was in that area. And we detected low levels again of VOCs up near the north side of the park, which has houses across the street. So we went into those houses and had a plan to monitor for indoor air, because volatile organic chemicals, solvents, they do volatilize, and they will come off out of contaminated groundwater into a vapor phase and can migrate, up into basements and whatnot, sumps and whatnot. So we continue to monitor those. We found no detects of any of the contaminants of concern in any of those houses. So now we're in the process of designing a system that will intercept the groundwater that's flowing towards those houses, and basically eliminate the risk for the future. Because we could keep monitoring those houses, but then all of a sudden you find something in a house. Now, what are you going to do about it? So we're being, very proactive in basically controlling this, keeping it within the boundaries that we know, and protecting the neighborhood. That system is under design right now, but expecting that it'll go in this summer. And groundwater flow changes seasonally, so maybe it was a seasonal thing. I know those homes up there have sump pumps in them. Well, when you pump water, you tend to draw things towards you. We don't know if that's had an effect or not, but we're continuing to study it. We're continuing to apply computer models to that phenomena. But at the end of the day, we're going to eliminate that risk.
So when you intercept the contaminants, are they transported somewhere else, put through municipal sewer system, or how are they disposed of?
No, they will be cleaned up to drinking water standard through an on-site treatment system, and then it'll discharge back to the storm sewer that then goes into the pond, but under a general discharge permit for surface water. Right now, it might be because we're trying to just pump enough to intercept and prevent groundwater from flowing in that direction. But I'm guessing it'll probably be in the neighborhood of maybe a gallon or a gallon and a half a minute that will actually be discharged to the storm sewer. We run that all through the village, and that there's plenty of capacity for that small amount of discharge of clean water.
And are you working with any agencies on this system, or is it all in-house?
Well, our primary consultant is Tetra Tech, and they're working on the design of the system. We're also in collaboration with the University Consortium, because that's their business as well. So again, whatever we put in will work. It's just a matter of getting the final design and installation.
And discharge into water discharge, that falls under the DNR also,
Yeah,
or?
Right. It's called a general discharge, a WPDS permit, I believe, where the pond and the drainage ditch that go to Koshkonong Creek, although they may be on private property or in the town, they're actually, waters of the state. So I have contacted the Houstons, because it's the Houston's pond, right? And I've got a long-standing relationship with the Houstons. We've gotten along very well over the years to resolve any issues. And I also notified the town of Cottage Grove, Chris Hampton, of our intent to do, put in the system and discharge a little bit of water through the drainage way. So we're Hydrate. I just want everyone to understand we're very transparent, and we look at you as our neighbors, and so we want to obviously treat you like neighbors. We just don't get a chance to interact very often. But that's Hydrate, and that's the way we want to be in every town that we have a facility, as part of the community and neighbors with our neighbors. So if anyone ever has any questions, 100% transparent. And you've got my contact information now. Whatever you want to know. As a matter of fact, if with the pandemic wasn't upon us, I mean, you're all invited to come and tour our facility as well. Because we've had a number of people in the past from the village board that, want to see what we're doing. And that's fine with us.
I appreciate that. With that being said, if there's a time when, or if the ground pollutants were to provide any conditions where perhaps we shouldn't have our playground open or something of that sort, I would hope we can have open communication about that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the depth of groundwater underneath the park is probably 15 feet or so, and the level of contaminants isn't as high as in some areas of the site. So the potential for volatilization of those contaminants to come up through that soil column and then into the fresh air to present a risk to anyone, on that property is almost impossible, if you will. Not even something that we're monitoring for because it's so remote.
So we could move on to the last point on the prepared questions, just to know more about any extra information about how continue to improve your systems, training to safeguard our air, groundwater, and natural resources, and then if how the EPA and DNR fit into that monitoring and permit process moving forward.
Sure. I also sent along our long-standing policy. It's called the Integrated Compliance Management System. And I don't know if you had a chance or the patience to read through it, but it's a multi-step plan that involves not only SOPs and employee training, auditing, delegation of responsibility, et cetera. Again, we take, compliance very seriously. And if you look in the top upper left corner of that, there's an original date, and that goes back to 1993. And I actually wrote that plan when I came to Hydrate because it was, 100% compliance or I'm not working here. And it was fully adopted by the owners and the board of directors. And if we can't do it right, we're not going to do it at all, has been our motto. And I've always said that any regulator that comes to our gate, we should be telling them how we're regulated, not the other way around. So we need to be expert in this, and that's our goal. So I can give you that assurance that it is the operating culture of Hydrate. And again, the capital expense that we put in to compliance, not only at Cottage Grove, but to all of our facilities, and safety is probably quite a bit more than a lot of companies even think about. I just want you to know that we want to be the best. in every aspect of the chemical industry, because not being the best is, a short, a long trip off a short dock, if you will.
You talked about the facility being set up that you could have growth in the future. I guess even if you stayed at the current size and different processes that you do now, what are the permit requirements for your facility? And is it through DNR, EPA? I guess how
primarily through the DNR. DNR has been authorized by EPA to implement the air permits, also our hazardous waste permits. Those are the two primary regulatory permits at Cottage Grove, because we do bring in waste, we do recycle it, we do also process to move it on to other waste handlers. So it's a service we provide to our customers that we can help them manage their waste, and we can also recycle their waste if it has recycle value. So that all falls under the hazardous waste program, and so we have a permit, for all that. And then as we talked about the air, I know this probably won't mean much, but we have a Title V air permit there, which is very extensive, and we have compliance maintenance plans for every aspect of our air compliance. So it's a lot of daily record keeping and checking, and then, as you know, the leak detection monitoring side of that is where we're improving that now as well. Again, I don't think we're in a substantial non-compliance with anything. It was more a matter of looking at the data from two different perspectives. So we'll get that ironed out as well.
All right, then thank you for that information. In the permitting process, these are all regulated by EPA and DNR, because chemicals such as those that you process or are produced in result of recycling different chemicals, they pose a threat to humans and wildlife. And if inadvertently or due to maintenance or an accident, exposure to these types of things could cause diseases in people that live or work nearby. Is there any organization that tracks any diseases nearby? That's the real life effect of being exposed to chemicals, that humans aren't supposed to be.
Right. Not that I'm aware that anybody's, tracking health data. Again, we're within our permit limits for our emissions from the facility. But I haven't seen any data on.
Say, Heidi. This is Barb from the AIR program. I'll just point out that the Department of Public Health has purview over that kind of information.
Sure, they set the acceptable limits for people to be exposed to, which sets the limits for permits. Is that
not quite like that? EPA sets the limits. EPA has the science and does the research upon which the limits get set, and we follow suit with that, unless in some cases the state of Wisconsin gets even more restrictive than EPA. But with regard to health impacts from tracking data related to actual health repercussions from exposures to things, that's a Department of Public Health kind of activity. And I would hope that if anybody were experiencing significant health problems, they would be contacting a medical expert on those, and to get it addressed, but also so that the medical community is aware of what's going on.
Thanks, Barb. I'm not sure if any DNR or EPA have any closing thoughts.
Okay. If not, then what I'll do, thank you, Heidi. And for those that chimed in from both Hydrate, DNR, and EPA, what I'd like to do now is turn it over to other board members who may have additional questions that they want to ask. And then we'll open it back up for public comment at the end to wrap things up. All right, if no board member has a question, what I'd like to do is just ask the DNR real quickly. Are there other areas where we are falling behind, say the EPA in our local DNR, state DNR, where we need to, as citizens, shout out to our state representatives to, push for things to catch up? I'm just, as a broad stroke question. Barbara, you mentioned that there was the detector that the EPA was using that we didn't have at the state level, and we've just got one or two of them. Obviously, Hydrate now has more than that. Their consultant does, because they're using them. I'm just curious, are there other areas where we've kind of fallen behind as a state that we need to shout out as residents, whether detection or other areas where you're aware of? Not put on the spot.
No, that's okay, because I really enjoy the public participation process of what we do. I mean, we can only implement the regulations in as much as you have told us what regulations you want us to implement. So I really do support the kind of process of citizens getting involved in this process, in working with their representatives to affect a change that they think is appropriate. And I think that's the best way to go about it, because just like we do the best we can to base what we do on the science we have available to us, the rule development process requires a certain amount of scientific basis as it moves forward as well. And so it's kind of the thing where they like keep moving each other up as they go. And it's a good process. So to that, I kind of say, bring it on, and let's see what we can accomplish. That said, the Wisconsin Air Program has pretty careful regulations, in some cases more stringent than even at the federal level, on our hazardous air pollutants. Now, given the federal regulations that this facility is already subject to, we can't add to those regulations, but we can continue to do the best we can to determine the compliance with the federal regulations as best we can. Occasionally, obviously, if EPA steps in and offers a sister opinion on this kind of situation, they can find things that we've missed, or like specific to that very important piece of equipment that they used, they have tools that we don't have. And seeing them use it has been very helpful to us, because it gave us the impetus and the motivation and the inspiration to leverage what they were able to do with it. And as we put forth requests within our own department to get a hold of that equipment. And so that was very helpful to us, and we're going to be using that going forward. As far as other things the public can do to impact these situations, well, I'm a little bit of an idealist, and we've got a complaint system that we track incoming complaints, and the more people want to notify us of observations that they have, that we can log those into our system. It's not a 1-for-1 kind of ratio. If one complaint comes in, we don't immediately go down and do something. Make the facility shut down based on one complaint, but we look at the preponderance of evidence. We look at the compilation of information that we get from citizens, which occasionally has been very helpful. And we enjoy that kind of relationship with the citizens in the community around some of these larger facilities, because we can't be everywhere at once. And so the more information we get from the field with the help from citizens, the better off more informed we'll be about things that they're experiencing. So that's what I would put out there. Don't be afraid to give us a call if you're experiencing some observation that you feel you have a concern about. Our response to that most likely will be to call up the facility and say, hey, what do you guys got going on today? Do you have any upsets? Is there something weird happening that can you walk around the plant and see what's going on? We will also occasionally visit sites based on those complaints. Obviously, in the situation of COVID, where we have some pretty tight restrictions on that, but we have some environmental wardens and conservation co-workers in our department who might already be out there. And so not being hesitant about letting us know of observations that you have is I guess my main point that I would say. Going forward, I would encourage that.
All right, thanks, Barbara. Again, I'll turn it to the board if they have any other questions for the presenters today.
I do. This is Sarah. Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming tonight. The question I have is, you had mentioned for the DNR that you didn't have the right piece of equipment to find what the EPA found. I'm wondering if there are other gaps in equipment that you have, or things that you wish you could get a result on or a reading on, but you don't have the right equipment. Are there other areas you would be concerned about, but you can't measure them or test them?
Well, we could always use more equipment and more tools and more toys to go out and evaluate the emissions that we sometimes are sure are there, but they're difficult to measure. Beyond getting 10 more of those handheld monitoring devices to have more at our disposal, no, and it's a little bit of a tricky situation. We've got limited funds right now, and the device that EPA used is like the gentleman from the facility was mentioning earlier, is more broadband than the previous version of that same device, and so it's as though it's not going to tell you exactly what you're looking at. It's as though it's telling you that there is an amount of a type of pollutant that it picks up on, and that is, as far as I've been told from experts who know about these types of equipment, if you're talking handheld sampling devices, that's about as good as you're going to get, unless you happen to know what specific pollutant you're looking for, in which case there's a compendium of 100 different devices that one might use to pick up, that's specially designed just for any one pollutant. But that becomes an untenable number of equipment, because you really rarely know the specific type of pollutant that you're looking for. And so the broadband equipments are usually the preferred type. Does that help?
Yeah, I guess so. So there isn't any other new, I guess I'm just wondering, would the EPA come in 2 years and find something again that they were more advanced at finding that we let go on for 2 years because we couldn't capture it on our studies?
Well, we keep in pretty good communication with them. If they have something, we hear about the equipment they have at their disposal. And there occasionally are some tools that we hear they have that we thought, gee, that would be nice. But like I said, we have a fairly limited budget on these types of things. So unless we can justify an overarching need for certain amounts of capital investment, we have a hard time going there. This device was a very good example of how everything worked just right. EPA came in and used it. They were able to have an impact, and we were able to leverage that instance to get a hold of one of those ourselves.
Thank you.
Any other questions from board members or comments? All right, so at this point then, what I'll do is we start at the beginning with opportunity for public to speak. Since presenters did have opportunity to, share their thoughts, I thought we'd wrap it up with opening it up again for public appearances, giving, again, members of the public, please share your name, your address, and your comments, and please hold your comments to no more than 3 minutes, as I said at the beginning of the meeting, just in case we have a number of individuals who would like to speak. And then we'll at least collect those for the record. So with that, I will pause and I'll open back up for public comment.
Rebecca Ninke, 3004 Morning Dove Drive, Cottage Grove. I have a question about the runoff from the current company, not the predecessor company, into Houston Park, and not really necessarily related to the groundwater. When my kids were younger and we were playing in that park and they wanted to play in the trees that are at the border between the two, there's a slight hill there. There was a pretty nasty, I would call it a little stream of sludge coming down that hill from where the tankers are stored. So I'm wondering who's testing the above ground water?
That entire area is now paved, and it is directed to a contained stormwater collection point. And we test our stormwater before we discharge it, to off-site to make sure there's no contaminants. If there are contaminants detected, it's all pumped out and managed as a waste. I don't know, because that was then, this is now. I can't relate to what you're saying, other than the fact that I know that entire area is contained and stormwater controlled and tested.
Ask the question.
Rebecca, any other comments? Okay. Anybody else from the public have any other comments?
I'm Ann Shinneman. I live at 205 Yarrow Hill Drive. And we built our house in '96, and our land in the back butts up to the fence, not behind where the drainage area that they have now is cement, but the other end where the hill is. And I apologize. We thought the meeting was at 7, but I was wondering if someone could summarize if there's a things to do list based on tonight's meeting. And also, I'm not familiar with Barb and her position. And when we've had questions, we've just called Hydrite directly. So it would be nice if the neighborhood could have a list of, informational names and numbers that we could contact. And also, if any of the pollution that water, groundwater, surface water, or the actual ground itself, if it was discussed at all that they could that be monitored periodically and let us know. I guess I'm just looking for more communication. I don't mean to be a nosy neighbor, but I'd like to know every once in a while that things are on the up and up. So whenever we've had a concern, it was addressed. So I appreciate that in the past.
Hi, Anne. It's nice to meet you. I'm the supervisor for the air management program in the South Central region part of the state. All the counties down here, all the way up to La Crosse County and over to Rock County. I don't have Dodge, but I do have Jefferson and Columbia. I can tell you right here now that Philip Adoe, Philip, and that is his first name, and his last name is Adoe, Adoe. He's the assigned compliance inspector for the facility, and he is the one who did the last inspection at the facility. He'll be doing the next one. If you have any observations from the neighborhood, he can take that. I guess preferably, complaints help. I do think that talking with the facility first is usually the preferred method because that's the most effective way. If you want to call us, and we're just going to turn around and call the facility and put the same question to them anyway. So I do support establishing also that relationship with the facility. And given John and Dan's appearance tonight, I feel like they've made a good. It seems like they want to establish a relationship with the community more, so I would encourage folks to keep doing that. But please do, if you are noticing and developing concerns about something you're observing, please feel free to contact Philip relative to the air pollution side of things. If it has to do with water or surface water or groundwater, we're the air program, so we kind of have a separation of responsibilities there. But Philip is a good guy, and if there's air pollution concerns that come out, feel free to contact him. And I'm going to look up his telephone number right here and see if I can't find that for you. He's also on email, and like everybody else in our program, we're all working remotely right now, so email probably is the better method of communication, just because cell service is sometimes questionable.
Barb, if you could give that information to the village trustees or John or Matt Giese, then they can get information out to us.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Anne, for the question, and Barb for the response. Any other members of the public have comments you'd like to? All right, if not, then again, I'd like to thank the presenters from the EPA, DNR, and Hydrate, and certainly for the public for coming and asking their questions and making their comments, as well as the board tonight. With that, then, I will ask if any member of the board would like to adjourn the meeting.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right. Thank you, Troy. Thank you, Sarah. Any non-debatable? All those in favor, then?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Motion passes. We are adjourned. Thanks again, everybody. Have a pleasant evening.